Welcome, everybody, to our third presentations from Carl Adams. As many of you know, Carl Adams is a two-time NCAA champ, a world team member, an entrepreneur, and a legendary coach. Over 40 years ago, he invented the Adam Wrestling system to be able to train without a partner. He's going to talk a lot about his company and what they produce, and then just a lot about wrestling and the different lessons he's learned along the way. We want to keep in our thoughts and prayers Matt Eveleth and Don Erst. Matt Eveleth is a teammate of ours from UPenn, who's right now battling cancer. Don Erst is this Nettie's coach and longtime close family friend who's also battling cancer. So we're going to keep them and all others that are suffering with that affliction and fighting it in our minds. We're also driving donations day for Beat the Streets Wrestling. As you know, they do a lot of work in cities across the country, working with low-income athletes that need help altering life's trajectories. So those donations are going to be on the website that's hosting this page. If anybody's interested in replays, those are going to be posted up on the website under the replay section. Those are free through Sunday. If you have questions for Coach, just go ahead and put those in the Q&A section, and I will feed those to him as we get to the end of his presentation. So thanks, and Coach Adams, you're up.
Well, thank you. The first thing I would like to do is thank Wrestling Mindset for this opportunity to speak at this clinic. And I also want to thank all of the individuals, coaches, wrestlers for joining in on this seminar. So today I'm going to be speaking about the mental, physical, and technical aspects of wrestling. And a lot of times when I do clinics or speak to young wrestlers and or coaches, I talk about those three concepts: the mental, the physical, and the technical. And if you think about the sport of wrestling, wrestling involves those three concepts almost all the time. And they are three concepts that involve quite a bit. They can go off in a lot of different directions. And so what I tried to do for this seminar, this talk, is to narrow the focus a little bit and talk to the audience about ways that I implemented these concepts during my 41 years of coaching. So the mental, the physical, and the technical. I think if coaches can focus on these three areas, as well as wrestlers, they'll be able to put together the best strategy and also monitor what's going on with their training at the beginning, throughout the season, and to the end of the season. And so the big goal would be to be at the highest possible point in each one of these areas at the end of the season when things really count. So the first thing I want to talk about is the mental aspect. And to me, having a high level of mental toughness is probably one of the most important attributes an athlete can have. And it's not the same for all athletes. Some are much more mentally tough than others. So as coaches and as athletes, we want to figure out how we can be the best in this area. And so what I've done is just jotted down a few ways that can help wrestlers overcome deficiencies in their mental approach to wrestling. And one of the things that I've looked at over the years is the level of conditioning. If an athlete is in really, really good condition, that will give him or her an opportunity to overcome some of the shortcomings in the mental area. For example, if you're in great shape, you're not going to feel the pain of fatigue or some of the physical stress that is involved with the sport of wrestling. So getting yourself in great condition would be one way to overcome some of those mental deficiencies. Another thing that I want to talk about, and I'm looking at my notes here, I'm following along, is that coaches, as much as possible, should talk about mental toughness and implement strategies so that their team members or athletes can be better competitors when they're in competition. And I think one way to do that is to have discussions about it as often as possible. And then that way, I think athletes are going to be a little bit more focused, and they're going to be able to concentrate a little bit better because they're thinking about this mental toughness a little bit more. Another thing I want to talk about is one of the things that happened over my coaching career in regards to mental toughness and just being mentally strong, that I feel helped our program go to another level. And it was something that almost happened by mistake. And so there's a little story behind it. So I'll tell this story. So anyway, in the year of 2011, 2012, we had scheduled a dual meet with Iowa State, my alma mater, and we're going to be traveling out to Iowa to wrestle Iowa State in a duel. And the day after the duel, they had an open tournament. So we traveled out to Iowa State, and before the match, I was feeling pretty good about our chances against Iowa State. It was going to be a tall order, but I felt like, there's a chance we could knock these guys off. So anyway, long story short, the match started, the match ended. We won one match. Obviously, I wasn't very happy. Kids on the team weren't very happy with their performance. And so after the match, my assistant coach was in the locker room talking to the kids on the team. And I was out visiting with some of my former Iowa State friends and people that I knew, because I was there for a period of 10 years wrestling and coaching. So after speaking with a number of individuals and visiting with folks, I made my way to the locker room. And when I got to the locker room, my assistant coach, Sean Gray, who's now an assistant coach at Princeton, he said to me, he says, "Coach Adams, what do you think about the match?" And I said, "No one wanted to hurt." I said, "It hurts to win." And little did I know that really struck a chord with the guys in the room. In fact, one of my captains, John Hall, spoke up and he said, "Coach, you're right." And so, we had our little discussion about the match. And the next day, we were going to wrestle in an open tournament that was going to be held at Iowa State. And I feel like that concept, that statement, "it hurts to win," really resonated with the guys on the team. So the next day we wrestled in the tournament. We won a total of 33 matches, which I thought was really good for us. It was a Midwestern tournament. We traveled all the way from Boston. And so we were seeing some of the better wrestlers in the country. In fact, Oklahoma State was one of the teams that was at this tournament. So anyway, after we went back home, we had scheduled a return match with Iowa State the next year. And so we were not feeling very good about what happened in that match. So this concept of it hurts to win was with the kids in the program during the spring, over the summer. You know, we had wrestling camp and we were training and we were really focused on this return match that we were going to have from Iowa State. And so November rolls around and Iowa State returns the match and they're in Boston now. And, you know, Iowa State is a program that had won 7 national titles and, you know, one of the most renowned college wrestling programs in the country. And as far as I'm concerned, we were at little old Boston University, a New England team, Division I, but certainly not at the level of an Iowa State. So it was a quad, and we had West Point there. I think Harvard was wrestling in the quad, and it was us and Iowa State. And so the last match of the evening was Boston University versus Iowa State. And we talked about this hurt to win deal before the match. And so the match started. And as it turns out, we won the match. We beat Iowa State 21-16 in that duel. And that was probably one of the biggest wins that we had during my time at Boston University. But the thing that happened was that for the wrestlers in the staff, that statement, that concept was so profound that the wrestlers put up a big poster in the wrestling room with that statement written across that poster. And it was a concept that we locked into during the rest of my time coaching at Boston University. And I felt like it was a great tool for the coaching staff to use whenever one of our wrestlers was in a really, really tough struggle and they really had to dig deep to pull the match out. You know, we would say, you know, it hurts to win. And for our kids in the program, it really resonated, and I think it made a big difference. And so for coaches and wrestlers out there, if you can anticipate that when you're in a tough match, that it's going to hurt, you know, and you can anticipate the hurt and the pain that you might have to struggle with over the course of that match. If you're ready, then you're going to be more prepared to win that match. And so that's the whole concept of it hurts to win. I just think it's a powerful concept to share with athletes. Another concept that I shared with my wrestlers over time was that on a given day, athletes are 15 to 20% better than the best performance that they've ever had. And I really believe that. And there were times that I shared this with our team, with the guys on the team before matches. And what I would do would be to cite examples. And one of the main examples that I would cite would be the Dan Gable match against Larry Owens. I was on the team at the time. No one ever thought that Larry Owens would beat Dan Gable in that match, but he did. And so as great as Dan Gable was, he lost his very last college match when he had won, I think it was 180 matches in a row throughout high school and college. Another example that I've used over time would be Bob Beamon. He's a long jumper who broke the Olympic long jump record by 60 centimeters, almost 2 feet, in the 1968 Olympics. He jumped so far that the officials couldn't even, the measuring tape that they used, it wasn't long enough to measure the jump. So they had to do it manually. I think in terms of Jesse Owens, 4 world records in 45 minutes, that type thing. So I think citing what can happen when athletes really set their mind to achieving a certain goal, a lot of good things are going to happen.
Yeah, Coach,
In regards,
I love those examples. You know, one of the ones we talk about a lot is Roger Bannister, who broke the 4-minute mile for the first time. And before that, you know, scientists and doctors thought it was impossible. And, you know, he set out to break that and change it. And, you know, the surprising thing is after so long of no one being able to do it or believing it was possible, the second person did it only 2 months after he did. And so,
right.
You know, it's like when we stop setting those mental limits on ourselves, sometimes there's more that we can achieve than we even believed was possible. Now, for you as a coach, you know, were there certain strategies that you used to try to get that athlete to be able to compete at that 15% or 20% better than what they've ever done before?
Yeah, I think the main thing you have to do is talk about it and cite these examples. And speaking of Roger Bannister, he was the one that I have on my list. I didn't mention him because I felt like it would be a little too many. But when he broke the record, it was 3 minutes, 59 seconds, 59.4 seconds. Now, the record now is 3 minutes, 43 seconds. So it's continued to come down over time. But it's just amazing what can happen when you really set your mind to something. Another match that I think of, and you might remember, is Jake, is Lincoln McIlravy, when he lost in the finals to the kid from Illinois. Very few people thought that would happen, but it did. And I think all of us over time have seen situations where the performances have been phenomenal, just out of this world performances. You know, Flojo, when she ran the 100 meters in 10.4, and I think that record still stands. And the thing is, these records come down at some of the most important moments when the most pressure is on these athletes. And so those are the things that I wanted to kind of speak about in regards to the mental aspect. The next thing I want to talk about is the physical in regards to wrestling. And I think everyone recognizes that wrestlers and all athletes have to be in great shape. The question is, you know, how do we achieve that? And exactly what does it do for us? And again, I think in terms of Dan Gable, you know, Dan was known as the most well-conditioned wrestler probably ever. And I can attest to that. And by being a teammate, watching him compete against other wrestlers and seeing how much his conditioning helped him, meaning that by the time the second period rolled around, a lot of his opponents were done. They had very little left. And so the thing that I noticed, and this is from wrestling with Dan, is that if your physical conditioning is so good that you can overwhelm an opponent with pressure intensity, it will make a big difference. Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, it will make a big difference. So in my mind, getting your athletes into the best possible condition is a critical part of what we do as wrestling coaches and wrestlers. It really pays when you're not worried about getting tired, when you're not out there in a match pacing yourself, because everyone picks up on it. And if your opponent is in better shape than you, then you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, I've heard it said that fatigue makes cowards of us all. And it just makes it much easier for somebody to give up on themselves or allow that victory to slip through their fingers. Now, and I think the other piece about that that's huge is, I think the best wrestlers typically wrestle their style, their pace in the positions that they want to wrestle a lot or as much as possible during a match. And if you're not in the conditioning or if you're not as conditioned as you should be, it's hard to wrestle the same pace you want the whole match. And if somebody wants to go faster or go harder, it's difficult to be able to make that pace your own. Now, what are some tips you would have for, high school, middle school coaches that are looking to help their athletes get in that tip-top conditioning so that they're ready to go against anybody they compete against?
That's a good question. I would say pay attention to the facts. If you're wrestling in practice, and this is after season has been on the way for a while, and you're getting tired, or if you're getting tired in competition, so tired that you can't compete at a high level, then you need to pay attention to the facts. You're not in shape. And so you need to do more to increase your conditioning. And there's many ways to do that. And I think one of the best ways that I've found, obviously, and everyone knows this, is running. Could be distance, sprints, that type thing. And another way that it could be done is increasing your level of intensity when you're wrestling live. Now, what this means is that you don't have to go as long, but if you increase your level of intensity when you're live wrestling, your conditioning, I feel, will improve tremendously. And I've seen this happen over time with many of the kids that I've coached. A lot of times, wrestlers work out at just a comfortable level. Once you get into competition and you're really pushed, you're going to get yourself tired. So it's important to raise your level of intensity in the practice room so that when you get into competition, you can keep the pressure on your opponent and continue to get him tired and put yourself in a position where you're better able to win the match. But the bottom line is there's a number of ways to improve your conditioning. And, weightlifting is huge. And I would say get together with a good strength coach. Just increasing the amount of intensity when you're running, wrestling, whatever. And just know that if you're getting tired, you need to improve your conditioning. Mm. And so I think the most important thing out of this is to know that conditioning is a critical factor if you plan to do a lot of winning. When you enter a match, you shouldn't have to think about whether you can get tired during that match. You should be able to compete with a sense of freedom and know that you can wrestle your best match at the highest possible pace and not get tired. If you're thinking about pushing yourself to a level where you might get tired, then you're not in the shape that you should be in. So again, conditioning is a critical factor in the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, I would agree entirely. Now going back to like intensity when you're drilling, I know in established programs, when I look at those as programs that year after year are producing high level athletes, let's say at the high school level, producing state champs on a regular basis, fighting for team trophies, finishing in the top 5 or 10. I think that intensity, there's enough examples of it. It's typically easy for that to become a culture that is seen by younger wrestlers as they join that group. Do you have any recommendations for maybe coaches on a program that they're trying to rebuild that maybe they don't have those examples of athletes that are already drilling intensely? And I think because sometimes the struggle is athletes don't know what they don't know. Maybe they think they're going hard enough and they're not. So do you have any recommendations for coaches in a situation where they don't maybe have the examples in the room to highlight for the younger athletes and how they can kind of create that culture within their program?
I think sometimes you have to look outside of your own room, and perhaps there's other kids that live in the area that are very good wrestlers that perhaps you can get with from time to time so that you feel what it's like to go against someone who's above your level. And when you do that, you're going to get closer and closer to him, then he'll be able to pull further and further away from you. So, getting with people outside your room. And I think as a coach, talking to young kids and emphasizing the importance of pushing yourself so that you're really tired and then going beyond that point is a thing that will help you improve your conditioning. If you run sprints and then you kind of pull back when you get tired, then you're not really improving your condition. When you sprint or run and you get to the point where you could hardly run anymore and you push beyond that point, that's when your conditioning really starts to build. And so, it's the workload, that you're looking at. And that's the nature of this sport if you're talking about being a champion wrestler. There's no easy way to do it, and so there's an old saying, you've thrown a few out, the harder you work, the harder it is to accept losing. So
yeah, that's
wise
words. Wise words, Coach. Yeah. I always think I agree with that. Sometimes we see athletes complain about cutting weight. No, I'm not a big proponent of large weight cuts, especially I think in modern times we see it as more detrimental, especially at the younger ages. But even if it's something as simple as you have to diet a little bit just to eat a little bit healthier, if you're disciplining yourself more often, it makes losing a match more painful because you're putting more into it. You're investing more of your time and your energy into that. And as far as the endurance and the mental toughness that you spoke about earlier, I know one of the things we do with our program is we have athletes do what we call a 30-day mental toughness challenge, where for 30 days, they come up with a plan of every day there's a workout that's going to push them beyond their normal comfort zone or their normal limit in order to start teaching themselves that, one, you don't break when you get to that point where you're absolutely tired and exhausted. You actually have more in the tank. And guys like David Goggins kind of talk about this concept of when you feel like you're exhausted, a lot of times you still have 40% left. And but you have to teach yourself to do that. And that's where I think great coaches that like yourself that have obviously helped athletes learn that concept of winning is painful, and you need to be able to embrace that to have success on the mat.
Right, absolutely. So the next topic I wanted to speak about was the technical aspect. And I like talking about technical training probably more than any other aspect of wrestling. And I feel like that was and has been my forte as a coach. Number one, I think it's so important that coaches help their kids master the basics. I feel like that's something that's overlooked a lot more than it should be. And a lot of kids out there, they see a fancy high level move. Boom, that's wrestling. That's really good stuff. If you think about it, if you think about a Jordan Burroughs, a Kyle Dake, some of the top wrestlers in this country, they're not fancy at all. I think it's critical that coaches teach their wrestlers how to get in great position on the feet, from the bottom, or even top position, but primarily on the feet, because I feel like wrestlers need to be able to dominate their opponents on the feet. If you can dominate an opponent on the feet, you're going to win almost all the time. Okay? The things that you look at, we talk about mastering the basics. I had a lot of kids coming to my room at Rhode Island, Boston University, even kids at Iowa State when I was an assistant coach there for 6 years. And you would think that, wow, this kid was a state champ, 2-time state champ, even a national champ. They're going to have a good penetration step. Not true. And so as a college coach, you pick up on it right away. You know, that he's going straight to his knee. He's not stepping deep enough. His shoulders are way out in front of his body when he penetrates. We got to fix this kid. That's a basic skill. And when I say master the basics, keeping the knees flexed. One of the most simple concepts in wrestling, if you're wrestling on your feet. Level changing, stepping deep, and knee driving when you penetrate. The bottom line is that you can't do that for a couple weeks and do maybe 25 steps and think that you have it down. You should be in the range of 50, at least 50 penetration steps. Because when you think about attacking someone on the feet, that's the motion that you're going to use to get to your opponent. Mm-hmm. A deep step, a good knee drive, hips under your body, and knowing where to step and where your head goes, depending on what kind of shot you're taking. So mastering the basics, I think, is critical, even from the standpoint of, you know, keeping the elbows in. I don't want to bore people with this basics, but you see a lot of young kids. You see a lot of college kids reaching away from the body. The legs are straight. Yeah, your legs are getting a little tired, and so you straighten them out a little bit. The bottom line is that when you're in practice, you keep your knees flexed almost all the time, and then you won't get tired in competition. And the thing is, you're going to be a lot quicker if you don't have to come from a high position to a low position and then penetrate. So mastering the basics is important. Another thing that I think about is when you're teaching skills, I think it's important to have a systematic approach to teaching skills. If you're working with your team or an individual on your feet, for example, 2 good shots to the right, 2 to the left. 2 good setups with each of those shots. Now you have 8 takedowns. Mm-hmm. And you work those shots to the bone. A lot of young wrestlers think that knowing 10 techniques makes you a really good wrestler. That's not true. Knowing 2 techniques on your feet that you've done 5,000 times will help you be a good wrestler
Mm-hmm.
on your feet. If you look at some of your best wrestlers, they have certain skills that they score with almost all the time. And they've worked these skills to the bone. So I would tell any young wrestler, first, learn the importance of being in a good position on your feet or on the mat or whatever you're doing from the top position. Develop a couple skills that you feel comfortable with from each one of your three positions and work them to the bone. Now, to a certain degree, it might become boring. But the other thing that I tell coaches and wrestlers, when you look at the basics, once you start digging further down into the basics, the smallest little aspects of what you're doing, that's how everything goes to a whole new level. Because your speed, your timing, your leverage, your strength, and everything improves much quicker if you continue to improve your basics. The further you move away from the foundation of knowledge, for example, on your feet, the weaker you become as a wrestler. And so that's another way to kind of look at what you're doing as far as mastering the basics.
And that's it's why I think it's so important that, we hear from coaches like you and other coaches that talk about, drilling things so many times, focusing on basics, focusing on strong stances, because I think there's so many athletes that they don't see that as the path towards ultimate success. And in some ways, to get great at anything, whether it's speaking, whether it's sales, whether it's leadership, there's a certain amount of reps that we have to do. And the way that I always think about it is like, well, this ties into how badly do you want your goal? Because if you want your goal badly enough, you are willing to put up with a large amount of tedium if it is required in order to be successful. One of the quotes I've been kind of using to think about this is, success comes when you do the things that failures aren't willing to do. If you know,
right, yeah.
Success comes when you're willing to do the things that failures aren't willing to do, because it doesn't matter whether it's boring or not. If you want to win a national championships, there's certain things like maybe an extra run, extra sprints, extra reps, extra stance and motion that maybe they're not the most fun, exciting things. But if those are what the key to success are, the best people are willing to do those. And I also think talking about the systematic approach to technique is obviously game changing for many people. And it's one of the things that has allowed us at Mindset to be very successful. There's a lot of great coaches that do stuff with the mental side. They have bits and pieces that help them teach mental toughness or the ability to deal with pressure or nerves. One of the things that allows us to separate ourselves is that we have a very systematic approach, with, over 100 different topics that we can cover. And I've done so over and over and over with athletes and teams to gain, again, a certain level of mastery through a tedium of doing something over and over again.
Right.
Well, Coach, we're running short on our time here, but do you have any last closing thoughts before we switch over to our next presenter?
Just that, on this technical side, the one point that I have to make is that speed. And I think a lot of times coaches, as well as wrestlers, don't think about how much of an impact more speed could make for a wrestler. And as a coach, as a wrestler, I constantly focused on speed. I was quick. I'm going to pat myself on the back.
That's okay.
I was quick. And so I felt like I got to the point where I really understood the advantage of speed. So I constantly worked at getting even more efficient at using my so-called fast twitch. And I think if you don't tell wrestlers that, hey, you could be twice as quick as you're doing your moves. You got to concentrate on it. You got to focus on it. And you got to work on being quick every single day. And if you think about our sport, mm-hmm. and you think about the wrestlers who have refined skills, who really understand speed and quickness, they have a lot more success, I'm going to say, especially on the feet and coming off the mat. And I have this pet peeve about the sport and what it really takes to win matches. If you can dominate someone on the feet and you can get off the mat, you're going to win almost all the time. I feel like top wrestling, and a lot of coaches out there would fight with me on this, is the least important position. and so the way I look at that, I'm proof in the pudding. And the reason I say that is because in my 2 NCAA final matches, one was against the guy that was a 2-time finalist, and one was against Stan Desik, who ended up being a world champion, 3rd in the Olympics. I scored 27 points. My opponent scored 9. All of their points were escapes. I was able to get off the mat. If I got to my feet, you're in trouble. and so that's kind of the way that I look at this sport when you're developing your system of wrestling. You not only want to trade takedowns or be just good on your feet. The goal is to dominate your opponent on your feet. If you're thinking complete domination, you're at a whole new level. Mm-hmm. So I'll leave it at that, but I wanted to make that point.
No, I think that's a great one. And, I always think when I wrestled, there's 3 thoughts I always try to have in my mind: improve my position, score the next point, and break my opponent. And that, I think, speaks to that dominating aspect, that if you can go to that next level, it takes you to a whole new spot, right? You're not thinking about whether am I going to win or am I going to lose? What's the score going to be? It's like, I'm dominating. And it just puts you in a mental state that's much different than if you're trying to just, hold on by a 1-point win.
Right. Yeah. I think your level of confidence soars when you know that he can't take you down, so.
Well, perfect, Coach. Well, we've really appreciated you joining us. And for anybody that's a participant, we've posted the link to the next presenter in the chat. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Coach Adams. We also posted the link to his book in the chat in case you're interested in going to see some of his thoughts in the written form. But Coach, we appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you. And good luck to you guys. A nice job.
No, thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too now. Yeah, bye-bye.